Part 1. The Road to Dunhallow. The road to Dunhallow smelled of ash and old rain. Sir Aldric Vane rode with his visor raised, because he had learned long ago that people trusted a man who showed his face, even when that face was cut with scars they could not explain, and lined with years they did not ask about. His horse, a grey destrier named Cale, moved without hurry. Cale always moved without hurry. He had been in enough battles to know that speed was rarely the thing that saved you. The valley opened slowly, the way valleys do when they do not want to be found. First the tree line thinned, then the hills rolled back. Then there it was, a village of perhaps 40 buildings, ringed by a low stone wall that had been repaired so many times it looked like a scar running all the way around the settlement. Smoke rose from maybe half the chimneys, the other half were cold. Aldric slowed at the gate. There was no guard. There was only a boy, perhaps 10 years old, sitting on an overturned bucket with a short knife in his lap that he was using to whittle a piece of bark. He did not look up when Aldric arrived. He kept whittling. "Is there a headman in Dunhallow?" Aldric asked. The boy finally looked up. His eyes were gray-green, older than his face. "There's a woman," he said. "Merritt. She's not the headman. She's just the one who makes the decisions." Aldric almost smiled. "Where would I find her?" The boy pointed with the knife. Not toward the village center, not toward any building that looked important, but toward a structure at the far edge of the settlement. Low roof, stone walls blackened at the base. A forge, Aldric realized. Merritt was a blacksmith. He rode in. The village watched him the way villages always watch strangers, from doorways left almost closed, from windows with their shutters cracked, from the corners of eyes turned quickly away. A dog barked once and then went silent, as if embarrassed by the outburst. Two women, drawing water from a well, stopped their conversation entirely, and held it suspended in the air until he had passed. Aldric had ridden into 100 villages. He knew what fear looked like from the saddle. This was something beyond fear. This was a village that had already been broken, and was waiting, with the patient, hollow resignation of those who have been hurt before, to be broken again. He found Merritt at her anvil. She was perhaps 50, broad through the shoulders, with short white hair pushed back from a face that had once been striking, and was now simply strong. She did not stop hammering when he approached. She drove the last 3 blows into the iron with the kind of deliberate finality that said, "I will finish what I started, and then I will deal with you." Only then did she plunge the piece into the water barrel and turn. Her eyes moved over him without hurry. The horse, the armor, good armor, dented from use rather than from poor craft. The sword at his hip, which she would know was not decorative. The crest on his shield, a broken wheel on a field of blue, which told her he served no great house. A freelance blade, a sword for hire. "We haven't called for a knight," she said. "I know," Aldric said. "I heard about the village at Crestford. They mentioned Dunhallow by name." Something moved through Moret's face, fast, controlled. She put it away, before it became anything he could read. "What did they say?" "That you've lost 5 people in the last 2 months. That something is taking them from the fields at night. That the thing leaves no tracks, no blood, no sign at all. Just absence." He paused. "They also said you'd turned away 2 other knights before me." Moret crossed her arms. "We did. May I ask why?" "Because the first one wanted half our grain stores as payment," she said flatly, "and the second one wanted something else." Her eyes held his, steady and without apology. "Something I wasn't willing to give." Aldric nodded slowly. He did not push. "I'll work for whatever you can spare, food and shelter while I investigate. Nothing more until the thing is dealt with, and only what you judge to be fair after." Moret studied him for a long, uncomfortable moment. Aldric let her look. He had nothing to hide, and he knew how to hold still under scrutiny. "What's your name?" she asked finally. "Aldric Vane." She turned back to her forge. "You can stay in the stable. I'll have someone bring you supper." She picked up her hammer again. "Don't ask the villagers about what happened. You'll upset them. Come to me with your questions." Aldric dismounted and led Cale toward the stable. He did not yet know what stalked Dunhallow's fields at night, but he knew already that the thing he had ridden here to find might not be the most dangerous mystery in this valley. Part 2. The Shape of the Wound. He spent the first day learning the village by walking it. Not asking questions, Marit had made her position on that clear, and he had enough instinct to respect the boundary for now. But there was much you could learn by walking slowly and paying attention. The 5 missing were 2 field workers, a shepherd, an elderly herbalist who had gone out at dusk to check her garden, and a young man named Perrin, who according to the stone marker by the village chapel had been 19 years old. The markers were temporary, sticks with names carved into them, placed where no body had been recovered to bury. Aldric stood before them for a long time. What struck him was not the number, but the pattern. The field workers were taken from the eastern edge of the village, near the tree line, the shepherd from the northern slope, the herbalist from her garden on the western side, and Perrin, according to the unmarked rumor of the village's body language, which he was reading without asking, from somewhere closer to the center. The thing, whatever it was not confined to one approach. It came from everywhere, or it was already inside. That night he did not sleep. He sat in the hayloft of the stable with the ladder pulled up and his back against the wall, watching the darkness through the gap in the boards. Kale was quiet below him. The horse would tell him if something approached. Nothing approached. But an hour past midnight, Aldric saw something that lodged itself in his mind like a splinter. A light, moving between the buildings. Not a lamp, too steady for a lamp in the wind, more like a lantern, hooded, so that it threw only a thin blade of yellow. Moving slowly, purposefully, from the back of one building to another, then gone. He did not move. He filed it away. In the morning, he found Merritt and told her what he had seen. She listened without blinking. "Probably Osrin," she said. "He checks the grain stores at night. Has trouble sleeping." "What does Osrin look like?" "Thin, older than me, missing 2 fingers on his left hand." "Thin man with a hooded lantern," Aldric said, watching her face, moving from the east side of the chapel to the mill. Merritt's expression did not change, but she set down her hammer, which she had been holding throughout the conversation, and folded her hands together. "That's a strange path to the grain stores." "Yes," Aldric agreed, "it is." They looked at each other. In that look was the beginning of an understanding, that neither of them was quite willing to say out loud what they were each beginning to think. "Tell me about the eastern forest," Aldric said instead. Merritt was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "There's an old tower ruin out there, half a mile in. The villagers call it the Nail House. Nobody remembers why. Children used to dare each other to go near it." She paused. "They stopped going near it about 3 months ago." "Because of the disappearances?" "Before the disappearances," she said. Aldric went to the forest that afternoon, alone, on foot, with his sword belted at his hip and a long knife tucked into his boot. He told no one he was going. The Nail House earned its name the moment he saw it. It was not a tower ruin in the romantic sense. It had not collapsed gracefully into picturesque rubble. It had been torn. The stones at its upper half were splayed outward, like something had pushed through the walls from inside, with tremendous force. The iron fixtures that had once held the door were gone, but the holes where they had been anchored were stretched into long, ragged shapes, like gouges made by immense fingers. Something had broken out of this place. Aldric moved carefully through the ruins. The floor was covered in a thick layer of dead leaves, and beneath the leaves, when he crouched and brushed them aside, he found the remains of a containment circle. Old. The markings were not carved, but burned into the stone, deep and black. He had seen circles like this before, in a very different part of his life, before he had become Sir Aldric Vane of the Broken Wheel Crest. This was a warding circle, a prison, and it had been sealed, he could see, if he knew what to look for, the deliberate pattern of its construction, by someone who understood what they were doing. And it had been broken, he could see, equally clearly, that the breaking was not from within. The breaking had come from outside. Someone had opened it. He sat in the ruins for a long time. The light through the broken walls moved slowly across the burned stone. Somewhere above him, in the canopy, a bird called once and fell silent. When he left the nail house, he walked back to Dunhallow with a different posture than when he had arrived. Not fear, something sharper than fear. The focused attention of a man who has finally understood what game he is playing and found it more dangerous than advertised. Part 3. The Thing in the Valley. He went to find the thin old man with 2 missing fingers. Osrin lived at the edge of the village, in a house that leaned slightly to the left, as if it had been trying to look around a corner for the last 20 years. His garden was overgrown. His woodpile was low. He was the kind of man that a community sustains out of old habit rather than new need, present without being necessary, tolerated without being loved. He was also, Aldric discovered within the first 5 minutes of sitting across from him at his kitchen table, absolutely terrified. Not of Aldric. He barely seemed to register Aldric as a threat. He was terrified of something else. "You went out last night," Aldric said simply, not an accusation, just a statement. Osrin's hands, wrapped around a clay cup he hadn't drunk from, tightened. "I don't sleep well." "Where were you going?" A long silence. Outside, the wind moved through the overgrown garden. finally in a voice that sounded like it was being pulled out through a narrow opening. I was leaving something out. Aldric kept his voice very calm. Leaving what out, and for what? Osrin looked up at him. The man's eyes were shot through with red lines, not the red of old age or drink, but the red of someone who had not slept, truly slept, in a very long time. Food, he whispered. I leave food out, at the old well on the east path, because if I leave it, it doesn't come to the village. It? Aldric said carefully. You've seen it. Osrin shook his head. No one who sees it comes back. Then how do you know it takes the food? Because when I come back in the morning, it's gone. And no one else went missing that night. His voice cracked. It works. It's been working. I've been doing it for 6 weeks, since just after the 4th person went missing, and no one has disappeared since I started. Aldric leaned back. The 5th person, Perrin. He disappeared before you started? 3 days before. Osrin's jaw tightened. I should have started sooner. Aldric was quiet for a moment, turning the pieces over. The thing in the forest, he said slowly. Do you know what it is? Did you ever know someone who said anything about the nail house tower? Osrin went very still. Old Hessa knew, he said finally. The herbalist, the one who's gone. A pause so long it almost became silence. She used to say there were things bound in the old places, put there to keep them from the world. She said the binding needed tending, that the old wardings wore thin without care, like any seal on any jar. His hands released the cup. Desperation. Vengeance. Hunger for something they couldn't get any other way. He paused. Or to protect something. To make something powerful enough to frighten away a threat they couldn't handle themselves. Something moved in Marit's eyes. Fast. Gone. There was a lord, she said, and her voice had changed, lower now, stripped of its performance of steadiness. 2 years ago, he wanted the valley, for his cattle roads. He made offers, and when the offers weren't taken, he sent men. Not soldiers, men who come at night and burn things. She turned back to the anvil. We lost our mill that winter. We lost 3 houses. We lost a family that didn't rebuild, just left. Aldric said nothing. Let her speak. I found the nail house in the old records. Hessa knew what it was. She told me it was a sealed prison, told me not to touch it, told me that whatever was inside had been put there for a reason. Marit's hands pressed hard against the iron. But the Lord's men were coming again. I could feel it. The whole valley could feel it. And I thought, if there were something out there, something fearful enough, they would stop. They would find another road. So you opened it, Aldric said. I opened it. The words fell between them like a dropped sword. It worked, she said quietly. The Lord's outriders came to the edge of the valley. They turned back. Word reached us that they found another route. She exhaled, and then the disappearances started. Aldric crossed the forge and stood beside her. Not close enough to threaten. Close enough to be present. You couldn't close it again. Hessa said it could be resealed, but only with the original binding marks, and only if the thing could be drawn back inside. Her voice was hollow. She was trying to learn how, and then she was the 4th person taken. A long silence. Outside, the wind moved through the village. Somewhere, Kale shifted in the stable. Why didn't you tell the other knights? Aldric asked. Marit finally looked at him. Her eyes were dry. She was past the kind of grief that produces tears. She was in the deeper country beyond it, where guilt lives in the bones. Because it was my fault. Because if I told them what I'd done, they would have left, or worse. Because I was afraid. She closed her eyes briefly. And because I kept hoping I could fix it myself. Aldric looked at the cold anvil between them. At his own reflection, distorted in its iron surface. A scarred face, a broken wheel crest, a man who had spent 20 years cleaning up messes that other people had made in desperation. Tell me everything Hessa told you about the resealing, he said. Part 5, The Proving. He spent 3 days preparing. He used the pages from Hessa's notes, which Marit retrieved from the herbalist's house with the careful hands of someone handling both evidence and grief. He used the charcoal from Marit's forge to copy the binding marks, referencing the burned patterns in the nail house floor against Hessa's diagrams, finding where they matched and where Hessa had been partway through her work of translation. He consulted no one else, not because he didn't trust the villagers, but because the work required silence and focus, and because there was no one else who could help. What he was doing existed in that narrow country between scholarship and sorcery, and he had spent time in that country before, under a different name, serving a different master, In a chapter of his life he had sealed as deliberately as any stone circle. The broken wheel crest was not a lord's device. It was his own, a reminder. On the fourth night, he went to the east path alone. He brought food, the kind Osrin had been leaving, bread and salted meat, and he set it at the old well. Then he moved 50 yards down the path, into the dark beneath the trees, and he waited. He had drawn the binding marks on the path, in chalk mixed with iron filings, invisible in the day, traceable in the dark, to any creature that moved by a sense beyond sight. The marks formed a corridor, a funnel. Not a cage, but an invitation, a path that felt, to the thing he was calling, like the gap in a fence. At the end of that corridor, he stood inside a circle of his own making. He waited. The forest was very dark and very quiet. Kale was not with him tonight. At some point past midnight, he couldn't say exactly when, because time had gone strange and elastic. The darkness between the trees changed. It did not become darker, it became different. A density that was not of the natural world. A presence that registered in the part of the human mind that predates language, the deep animal register, the one that says something is here that should not be here, and it knows you are here too. Aldric did not move. The thing came slowly. That was the most terrifying part, its confidence. It was not sneaking. It was not hunting in the manner of predators, with urgency and terrible speed. It moved the way a flood moves, like time, like something that has learned it does not need to hurry. When it came into the corridor of chalk marks, it paused, and Aldric spoke. Not a battle cry, not a command. He spoke the words Hessa had recorded in her notes, the old words of the binding, the language of the original sealing, slowly and clearly, the way you recite an oath. His voice did not shake. He had not come this far, and prepared this thoroughly, to let his voice shake now. The thing in the corridor went very still. He kept speaking. The chalk marks began to do what chalk marks do when spoken over correctly. Not glow, not gleam, nothing so theatrical, but the night air above them became charged and close, the way it feels in the moment before lightning, when the sky is making a decision. The thing pushed against the corridor. It pushed hard. Aldric felt it not as pressure, but as a kind of dread that entered through his chest, a persuasive, intimate dread, the kind that whispers, not roars. It whispered, "You are small. You are temporary. You will stop speaking. You will become absence, like the others." Aldric had been called small before. He kept speaking. The binding took the way fire takes, first reluctant, then total. The thing contracted in the corridor. It shrank not in size exactly, but in presence, in weight. The massive gravity of its wrongness began to pull inward rather than outward. And Aldric moved forward, still speaking, following it step by step, driving it backward down the east path, through the trees, back toward the ruined tower, back toward the broken circle, which he had spent 3 days repairing with burned marks and iron, and the parts of himself he had sealed away and not opened since the days before the broken wheel. He sealed it. The last word left him like an exhaled breath. The nail house was quiet. The chalk and iron were cold. The night was just a night again, dark, ordinary, full of wind. Aldric stood in the ruins for a long time, breathing carefully. Then he walked back to Dunhallow. Part 6. The Twist in the Root. 3 days later, when the village had exhaled, and the fires were burning in all the chimneys again, when children were moving in the street, and dogs were not going quiet from embarrassment, when Osrin was sleeping, actually sleeping, not lying awake in the cold dark, counting the hours until he could leave another offering at the well, Aldric went back to Merritt's forge. She was working again. The hammer fell steady and deliberate. She did not stop when he came in. "It's done," he said. "I know," she said. "I could feel it in the village this morning. Something lifted." He set a piece of folded parchment on her workbench. "The binding marks, the full sequence, not Hessa's partial notes, complete, as best I can reconstruct from the original. Someone in this valley should keep them." A pause. "It will need to be tended, every generation." Merritt put down her hammer, looked at the parchment, did not touch it yet. "You knew this kind of thing," she said. "It was not a question." "Once," Aldric said, "before the broken wheel." She looked at the crest on his shield, leaning against the forge wall. "What does it mean?" "It means something was whole, and then it was broken," he said. "And I decided that was honest enough to wear." Merritt looked at him for a long moment. "The village will want to thank you," she said. "There'll be a gathering tonight. Food, they'll want you to speak." "I'll come," he said, "and then I'll go." Where? He thought about that, about roads he hadn't taken, about the next valley over where someone might be frightened, about how far Kale could carry him before winter closed the high passes. "I'm not sure yet," he said honestly. "Somewhere that needs someone who knows about old bindings and broken wheels." He was almost to the door when Moret spoke again. "Aldric." He stopped. "Before you came," she said slowly, "before any night came, I had decided to go into the forest myself and try to close the circle, with Hessa's incomplete notes, alone, at night, without knowing the full sequence." He turned, looked at her. "I know," he said gently. "I would have failed. Probably," he agreed. "So you didn't just save the village from the thing in the forest." She met his eyes, and in them was something direct and difficult, the kind of honesty that costs something to give. "You saved me from what I was about to do to myself." Aldric was quiet for a moment. Then, "That's the thing about quests to prove yourself," he said. "The proving isn't usually in the direction you expect." She picked up her hammer. He left through the open door into the cold morning air. Epilogue: What the boy knew. At the gate the boy was on his overturned bucket again, whittling. He looked up this time when Aldric approached with Kale. His gray-green eyes moved over the night the same way they had 3 days ago, with that ancient, unhurried attention. "You're leaving," the boy said. "I am." The boy turned the piece of bark in his hands. Aldric looked at it for the first time. He had not looked closely before. It was carved into the shape of a wheel. A broken wheel. He went very still. "Where did you learn to carve that?" Aldric asked quietly. The boy tilted his head. "I didn't learn it," he said. "I dreamed it, 3 nights ago." He met Aldric's eyes. "The same night you sealed the tower." The morning air moved between them. Kale shifted, patient as always. "Does it mean something?" the boy asked. Aldric looked at the carved wheel, at the clean break in it, deliberate, irreversible, and somehow, in the boy's hands, already beginning to look like the start of something rather than the end. "Yes," he said. "It means something." He mounted Kale and rode out of the gate. He did not look back. But he felt the weight of the boar's gray-green gaze on his back all the way to the tree line, steady and unhurried, as if it had all the time in the world, as if it already knew every road Aldric had ridden, and every road that still remained. The valley folded itself closed behind him.